What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Corner podcast, the show where I bring on guests from all different backgrounds to talk all the things mental health. I'm your host, Harry Potvin, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Sathiya Sam. Sathiya is an entrepreneur and the creator of the program DeepClean, which helps men of all ages worldwide overcome pornography addiction by resolving their root issues. Additionally, he is the host of the New Man podcast and has been featured on multiple platforms across the globe, sharing his own experiences as a recovered porn addict. Sathiya was such a blast to talk to, and this topic is super important, so I really want to thank him again for coming on and sharing his story with me. Before we go any further, can you believe that this is episode 91 of the Mental Corner podcast? It honestly, I was looking back at the videos, it seems like yesterday that Brady and I were sitting down and doing that first episode, thinking nothing of it. It's been such an insane ride, and I'm so thankful for all of you who have sat down and kind of gone on this ride with me. It's been such a blast, and I hope you stay on the ride all the way to episode 100 and wherever the heck this show goes. Now, before we get started here, guys, you know the drill. If you're listening, please like, comment, share, subscribe, give 5 stars if you're on that podcast platform. Share with someone who might want to hear this episode. It's a really great one, and I can't wait for you to listen. We'll talk to y'all very soon. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.
Thanks for having me, man. Excited to be here.
So before we get into everything, what got you started on advocating for porn addiction? Where does your journey kind of start with all of that?
Yeah, I don't think anyone when they're a kid and you ask them what they want to be when they grow up says, I want to be a porn addiction recovery coach. It's a pretty unusual thing. I have my own experience. That's the bottom line. I was addicted to porn for about 15 years. Really struggled. The pinnacle of it was when I was in university. Porn was kind of my reward for a long day's work, and it was my medication to cope with the pressure and the stress that came pursuing an education. And that was when I realized how bad it was as well. And when I tried to get help, or I shouldn't say when I tried to get help, but when I tried to get free, I realized I actually can't do this on my own. I had no idea. I didn't realize it was that bad. I always figured I could get rid of this when I need to, kind of thing. So realizing how helpless I was and nobody was talking about it. Podcasts and blogs were out there, but even still, it was really hard to find good resources. So I just made up my mind, one day I'm going to figure this thing out, and when I do, I'm going to tell the world so that nobody has to go through the hardships that I went through. So that's a little bit in kind of a nutshell what got me here.
That's amazing, man. So you said your porn watching kind of escalated in university. Did it happen before that, like high school, elementary school? Were you watching it before you went off to university?
Yeah. So a little bit of background on me. I am I grew up in Canada. I guess I'm a first generation Canadian. Both of my parents immigrated. My dad is a pastor, and he's a third generation pastor. So what that means is that his dad was a pastor, and his dad's dad was a pastor. So very strong religious home, and not you sometimes you hear about people growing up in a religious home and it's super staunch and very controlling and whatever. But my parents weren't like that. They were super chill. But those kinds of values are what we grew up with, and they paid money to send us to Christian education. So in a lot of ways, we had everything lined up for us to make good decisions in life. Nobody's perfect, but we really did have a good upbringing. So in the computer lab of my Christian school, I was 11 years old, and that's where I got exposed to pornography. My buddy's yo, my friend told me to check out this website. So we go to, it's a really innocent sounding website, type it in, and then it's what the heck? I hadn't even hit puberty yet. So to be honest, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I just knew it was bad. He knew exactly what it was. He was freaking out, putting his hands on the screen, trying to cover things up. But that's how it started. So I was super young. And statistically, the average age of exposure today is still about 11 years old. So that story is pretty common. But anyone who's had a problem to any degree with pornography knows the first time is very rarely the last. And that was the case for me. So it's not like I went home and I was what is that? I need more of it. Like I said, I was kind of scared by it. I didn't really get it. But then I did hit puberty, and you start to get curious and you start to explore. And even then, like when I was 21, or sorry, when I was 11, that was 2001. So this is like internet's just starting out kind of thing, just gaining some traction, but it was still super accessible. And so it was very gradual. In high school, it was pretty regular. Like maybe I was watching a couple times a week, that kind of thing. And all my buddies did it. Like, you know, you just think like, oh, I know this isn't great for me, but whatever. You're in high school, you don't have that kind of foresight. And then, like I said, in university, that's when I think I became really dependent on it to alleviate the stress. It became a coping mechanism for me, and that was when it was the worst.
Yeah, and when you were going through it, like what kind of made you go, "Oh, this is a problem now. Like I need to switch this up."
Yeah, I mean, university is a different experience for everybody, but for me, I really found myself there. I really felt like okay, I kind of know what my calling in life is. I know that like I really want to start speaking. I want to start really advising. I just love that kind of like mental health, the soft skills, you know, the therapeutic counseling side of it. So when I start to discover a little bit more of my calling, I didn't want to be a hypocrite. That was just the honest truth. It was like I wanted to practice what I was preaching, and I didn't want to be the guy who, you know, one day they do a news report like helped millions of people, but secretly was just like struggling all along. You know, like I wanted everything I do to be kind of this overflow of my personal life, regardless of whether or not the world found out about it. Just in my heart of hearts, I wanted to be consistent that way. So that was what inspired me to really get this thing figured out. And like I said, I I thought it'd be a couple weeks, or like I'd do a quick program or put a filter on my phone and I'd be good to go. And that was when I became aware, like, oh wow, like it was so easy to find ways around a filter, you know, or like it was easy to kind of get an accountability partner, but like it wasn't actually changing much. And I think that was when I realized, oh dang, this is a way bigger problem than I realized.
Yeah, for sure. The problem with stuff like that is like you don't realize how quickly it becomes a problem because it
Yeah.
just becomes part of your routine.
Yeah, yeah, it's totally normalized, and you kind of secretly convince yourself along the way. Like it's just those very subtle thoughts. They're like quiet whispers, but you're just like, oh yeah, it's just a little bit further. It's not really going to matter. Yeah, it's just an extra time here. You just kind of justify it along the way, and then all of a sudden you look back and you're like, dang, I did not realize how deep this hole really was.
Yeah, man, for real. Like, oh my goodness. And like so we were actually talking off camera about, how hard it is to like open up in respect to like mental health as a guy especially, or like, oh, I have depression, I have bipolar, like things like this it's hard to open up about. But for you, like how hard was it to open up to like your close friends and family about like, hey, I have a porn addiction?
Yeah, it was awful. I mean, it's not it's just yeah, like any kind of mental illness, it's not fun to share about to begin with. Then you kind of couple in like the shame that comes with porn, like I mean, there's shame that comes with all of it. Like even people who are depressed, all the messages that they hear are, "You shouldn't feel that way." Like just like cheer up, kind of thing, right? So it's that same kind of idea. I think for me, the added layer was the spiritual component, like a lot of religious shame. Because, like I said, I kind of grew up in a Christian home that instilled Christian values. So you grow up with a moral compass, and to just know that you violated that compass so significantly, it added a whole layer of like, who can I actually tell that's safe? Because I don't know if these people are going to think differently of me. Churches can be a little bit like my dad usually pastored smaller churches, so there's a little bit more tendency for like gossip and everybody's in your business a bit. And as a pastor's kid, there's expectations on you. So there was kind of that thing at play as well, where it was like, I don't know, like if people found out about this, like, does it affect my dad? You know what I mean? Like there's so many what ifs, and I think that was the really scary part. Um, but I somewhere along the way just like conceded, because it was like I can't do this on my own. I have to talk to someone. And it didn't start in those circles like where my family was super involved in stuff. I started with friends, and the interesting thing, and I think you'd probably relate with this, Harry, but like when I started talking to my friends about it, most of them were like, "Oh, yeah, me too, bro." Like there wasn't like there wasn't a lot of judging or like, "How could you look at that?" Like everybody got it. They're like, "Oh, dude, yeah, I've been there, or I am there." And that was super liberating. So once I had a couple experiences like that under my belt, it certainly gave me a lot of confidence, or more confidence at least, to talk about it. But yeah, those early conversations were pretty scary.
Man, I can only imagine. And the thing about like porn watching and porn addiction is that most young men can relate to it. It's just that whole taboo, like dark cloud over it. Like, I don't want to admit that I watch like an insane amount of pornography. Like, because then you just
Yeah.
worry about what people think. They're like, oh, this guy's a freaking creep.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, and you just don't know like if other people have struggled or if they get it, if they don't get it. It's yeah, it's a scary thing to do for sure.
The other scary thing is like the internet. You mentioned you were exposed at 11. It's so accessible for everybody. And like when you were, coming up in 2001, the internet was just a new thing. So, the resources were kind of limited, the porn videos were kind of limited, all these things were kind of limited, but now it's like the web is huge. And it
Yeah.
doesn't take much for, a little 9-year-old kid to click something and find a whole mess of shit. Like I was 9 when I watched my first video. I remember it
Mm.
vividly because I was like, "What is this? What is this
Yeah.
good stuff that I'm watching?" And immediately, like it's scary how easily accessible it is because all you need is a keyboard and a computer or a phone. Even most kids have phones now. You just look up a
Yeah.
keyword and it's right there.
Yeah, and I think like what's happening now is kids are finding it without even trying. I saw a stat lately. It's always hard with these stats, like in my area because it's such a taboo subject and the reporting is never like terribly accurate. But there was a stat that says 35% of internet downloads are porn.
Mm.
35%, which is like nuts when you think about how big the internet is. So that kind of like volume coupled with the accessibility of it as you're talking about, and then the fact that like it's affordable and it's anonymous because you can just do it in the confines of your home or your with your device. It just means that intentional or not, people are going to find it pretty early on in life now.
Yeah, man, it's terrifying. So I wanted to actually moving on with that, I want to talk about the negative mental health impact that pornography watching can have. So, in your experience and like in the stuff that you've researched, what are kind of like the negative impacts that excessive porn watching can have on a youth's mental health?
Yeah, I mean, the list could go on, but I think the most salient points are probably the physical impact. So you and I were talking about this before, and I think we must have read the same stat or the same paper, but it's reported now that about 40% of men under the age of 40 report erectile dysfunction, which is just unreal. Like that
Hmm.
was supposed to be like an old man issue, like the body's wearing out, the blood circulation's not as good, and now like here you have these young guys who should be like at the pinnacle of their sex life and they got nothing because they've watched porn. And I know that sounds like, well, you don't know that those 40% of guys are struggling because of porn, but the spike in that age group is literally directly correlated with the rise of internet porn. So it's very clear that there's a correlation there. There's definitely other factors as well, like stress and that kind of thing. But physically, the impacts are significant. The other thing that's actually really interesting, I just finished reading a book. It's called The Penis Book, appropriately named, and
Mm.
it's written by a doctor. He's one of the leading urologists in the world, and he sees a lot of guys who come into his office because they want to get male enhancement surgery. Which of course like is becoming very common. And he said the main reason is because these guys are watching porn videos and feeling super intimidated by their body and feeling like they don't add up and that they have to do something to become something better and something that's going to be adequate for their partners. And he said 80% of people leave his office once he gives them the stats about the average male genitalia. So it just goes to show you that like these porn videos are actually what's educating people, so much so that they're actually like willing to change their physical body so that they can add up, so that they can try to fit some norm that porn is presenting that is actually completely false. So that's sort of the physical impact, but I guess that example also ties into the mental impact, which is that it's creating all these lofty expectations of what sex should look like, and the amount of guys who come to me and are like, my partner won't do this, they won't do that. And it's like, yeah, well, that's actually kind of normal, bro. Like, you just like watch way too much porn, and your expectations are way out to left field. So I think it's really wreaking havoc on people's sex lives as well. And then I think there's the more emotional, social, mental aspect of like people just numbing out using porn and choosing to find their sources of connection there instead of actually investing in meaningful relationships, whether it's with a romantic partner or not. It means that guys are, sorry man, can't make it out tonight. I'm super busy, but actually they're at home watching porn. It's guys starting to feel lonely after a hard day at work. And rather than reaching out to their buddy, they just choose to watch a bit of porn because that kind of takes the edge off and it gives them that temporary feeling of connection. So the effects are widespread, but it doesn't matter. Like you can be healthy in a couple of these areas, but one way or another, porn's going to wreak havoc on those parts of your life. And the other area I'll mention as well is the spiritual component. That's not applicable for everybody, but for somebody like me who my connection with God is really important. When you engage in that kind of behavior, you feel bad about yourself, and then you feel like you've kind of made this mistake. It does create that distance between you and God, and when you don't know how to get out or how to recover, that can be a really hopeless feeling. In some ways, it can kind of perpetuate the cycle. Like, what's the point? I already messed up. So, what's another binge here or there, or that kind of thing. So, yeah, the effects are widespread.
Man, it's so fascinating in not a great way, but it's fascinating like all of the negative impacts that porn watching can have, because most of the time you're only on there for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes max. But you don't realize like the super huge impacts that it has. Like it's kind of like it's like the new world version of smoking, just taking the edge off.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's how it is. Like, or that's how, at least how most people start. It's like a little here, a little there, and that's really thanks to cell phones. Like cell phones just make it so easy to just a quick little watch here or watch there or whatever. But yeah, it's and I mean I don't know if cigarettes were quite like this, but it's a gateway. It can lead to much worse things and much higher dependency if you're not careful.
Yeah, for sure. And there's so many different kinds of like genres and categories accessible. Like people are just feeding into stuff that, like you mentioned, the person's like, "Oh, my partner won't do this." It's like, well, maybe I'm willing to bet 99% of the population won't do what you saw in that video.
Yeah, they're not getting paid, so yeah, so that's probably why they wouldn't be doing that stuff. Yeah, it's crazy. It really, I think that's the thing that's scary. Like especially for people who are younger, where your brain is still developing, you're still kind of forming your expectations of the world and of your sex life and whatever else. Those are hard things to undo. And people, I mean, again, when you're a teenager or even in your early 20s, sometimes you don't have the foresight. You don't understand how the way you're forming and developing is actually going to impact you down the road. But the guys who come to me that are a little further along in life, they're married, their sex life is suffering, or they don't know how to actually have just meaningful romantic relationships because everything about them has just been wired for the physical component, and that's kind of how they measure the efficacy of their relationship and everything else. So yeah, the impact it can go pretty deep pretty quick.
Man, like I know people in my circle. I obviously will not expose them, but like, it's gotten to a point where like having a connection with a partner is like difficult for them to do.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm 23. Like these people are in their early 20s and they're having trouble, like, for lack of a better term, getting hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's scary.
It's nuts. It's so wrong. Like it really should not be that way. But it's becoming really common, and I think this is the part that surprises people about why porn is so destructive, because you can kind of say like, oh yeah, of course it's going to affect your expectations for sex, of course it's going to affect you physically and whatever, but the emotional part is actually probably the most debilitating part of it. I like to say that porn is fast food intimacy. So it temporarily satisfies that need to have that meaningful connection with another person, but you're left with a bigger craving afterwards. And I think a lot of people forget that part of it. Like we're all wired to have deep, meaningful relationships. I believe long-term relationships. Whether it's with friends or with romantic partners. And I think our physiology, our biology, our neurology, it all points to that. So when you are constantly interrupting some of your natural wiring with things like pornography, you're short-circuiting, those capacities for intimacy, meaningful connection, and everything else. So then, yeah, you suddenly get into a more intimate relationship, and people just don't know how to connect. Guys, especially, guys are just really getting plagued by this, but it is across the board, guys and girls alike.
Yeah, for sure. And when it comes to like, because you mentioned, not to me, but in like the pre-video that you have on your profile on Matchmaker, you mentioned the stat about porn use or porn watching in the pandemic. Like,
Mhm.
what are we seeing from the pandemic? Like, what is porn watching looking like now?
Yeah, so and this is such an example of like where the porn industry has really they're honestly sadly they're just some of the best marketers and some of the best internet entrepreneurs out there. So when the pandemic started, Pornhub, the world's biggest porn site, they gave their premium subscription away for free.
Yep.
It was kind of like the hey, coping with the stress of the pandemic, like here's a freebie kind of thing. And what we saw is that people really took advantage of that. So, in some countries, like during the pandemic, those first 4 to 6 months, viewership was up by as much as 100%. Like it had just doubled.
A hundred?
Either, yeah, 100%. Like as in it had doubled the amount of viewership
Wow.
and the length of viewership. And in other places it was maybe more like 30 to 50%, but it was pretty much across the board. There was more viewership because people are looking for ways to cope with their stress, and some people are at the end of the rope and they just need an out. But yeah, the viewership was significant. And I know one of my mentors, he had said when the pandemic started, he said, watch the patterns that you developed during the pandemic because when we get into kind of the survival and reactive mode, we find ourselves in patterns just trying to cope, thinking like, oh, it's just for now. But of course, like you and I know, you don't just undo patterns. Like they don't just reverse themselves. And so that's what we're seeing now is that a lot of people during the pandemic thought, okay, yeah, like they kind of gave themselves a little extra grace because times were tough, but in the process they created a habit or a pattern that they're unable to reverse now that life is normalizing again. So the pandemic's played a huge role, and in all different facets, we're talking about how it's going to be years before we kind of recover from this thing, and the porn aspect is no exception.
Well, I was just gonna say because we've been in this for what, a year and a half, almost 2 years. Like that's plenty of time to build a habit when it comes to watching porn.
Yeah, and it's not even just the duration, but it's also the intensity. So like
Mm.
because a pandemic is so extreme, where there's high emotion, a high sense of fear, a high desire to just survive and find safety and comfort. It's not only creates the pattern, but it reinforces it, and it makes it that much harder to reverse when things do ease off. So yeah, this is going to be ongoing for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting like how I don't even know how to word this, but like it was it was almost like a comfort food for some people. Like it was a comfort consumption when it came to all this
Yeah.
stress because there was plenty of stress out there for the last year and a half. You could pick whatever you want when it comes to the news headlines, but man, it's just that it was that nice little escape for some people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like it's an escape. There's a soothing kind of comforting component to it, and then you think about all the lockdowns and all the isolation that comes with it. So just going back to what I was saying earlier, like porn is pseudo connection, so it's kind of giving you that false illusion that you're experiencing, something meaningful with another person, and it just becomes a very alluring option in those kinds of situations where you're confined to your house anyway. So what other options do you have to connect with people?
Yeah, it's true, man. It's God, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
So, like, where does porn go from here in terms of like the types of porn consumption, like the amount of porn consumption? Like, what is the trend that we're seeing start happen now?
Yeah, well, like you kind of touched on it earlier, Harry. You can find just about anything you want, you know. So there's becoming more and more options available. That's kind of the problem, I guess. It's like if you study the effectiveness of psychotherapies over the last 3 decades, most of the studies indicate that the effectiveness of psychotherapy has not changed very much. So like they've come up with all these new theories. Like there's equine therapy. Like you can go with a horse. You can spend a day with a horse, and it does different things to you. Like there's all these different therapies. Their effectiveness hasn't necessarily changed dramatically, but because there are new therapies, more people can engage with it. So somebody who doesn't want to be with a shrink and sit on his couch and talk for an hour can go spend a day with a horse and get the same kind of impact. So more people get reached because of the diversity. And porn is kind of like that as well. So the funnel is becoming wider and wider, and more people are finding access points. And that is probably only going to increase in the days ahead. The other component, of course, is that with the technological developments like virtual reality, even just the development of machineries and robots and all those kinds of virtual experiences now, yeah, I mean, it's enhancing somebody's experience of pornography as well if they have the money for it. So those are the parts that are really scary. I can remember like when I was really struggling, and also like because I struggled with porn, I was pretty scared to pursue anything romantically as a kid, like in high school. I remember feeling that a lot, and like guys are kind of scared of girls to begin with. Like generally, you're kind of working through some of your insecurities and stuff in high school. It was just exacerbated by the porn thing. But I just remember like having thoughts like, oh, how easy would it be to just hire somebody, like just to get kind of this thing that I want, and like it's not something I ever acted on, but the only option I had was to like wait until I turned 18 and hire an escort or something like that. But now, like with the development of technology, the other options for that thought are pretty scary, and they're pretty accessible for just about anybody who's got an internet connection and a device. So those elements are making are just making it scary for where porn could be going in the future, or where it is going really. So yeah, did I answer your question? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was asking. It is, and it is terrifying, man. Like I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way, but just looking at VR stuff, like porn aside, just VR in general, that shit terrifies me, man.
Yeah.
Like it's like people are using it as like an escape from reality, and it looks pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, but I've done VR. I think I did it once. My buddy bought a whole VR machine, and I went in it, and I came out, and I was like, dude, people are in this for hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you lose your grip on reality quick.
Yes, absolutely. And like there's an interesting parallel to this, which is video game addiction, something that's actually diagnosable now. Like a psychiatrist can diagnose you with a video game addiction. And that's a huge underlying factor of why a lot of people end up addicted to video games. It's escapism, it's exactly what you said. It's kind of finding this alternate reality and getting lost in it to the point that it's actually completely destructive to your own well-being. And VR is it's like that on steroids. So it's scary.
Man, the other topic that you just touched on is interesting because it brings me back to when I was, growing up trying to figure myself out. But like the whole body dysmorphia component that comes with watching porn and watching these super big, unrealistically shaped men, like, just get all these women who are also unrealistically shaped sometimes. Like I remember, being a teenager and like looking in the mirror and going like, I've got nothing to offer. Like,
Yeah.
because you're thinking like the people on the videos that you're watching are like you think that's the real world, and you think that's what guys are offering most of the time, and you're like, shit, man, I'm nowhere near that. Like I'm human garbage.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just comment on the male side real quick because this might be helpful for some of your guys. The average length in a male porn star compared to the average male is about twice. It's about double.
Yeah.
So that should put it in perspective a little bit. Like you're literally seeing a guy who has like double what you have on average. So how can you not feel intimidated and insecure if you don't know any better, right? And even the length is an interesting thing. Like I think it's somewhere I read the average porn video is 22 minutes long, and that is about 4 times the length of the average expedition in the bedroom.
Right.
So again, like you're getting these over glorified experiences that are completely unrealistic. I interviewed a porn star one time for my podcast, and a former porn star rather, who had kind of gone out of the industry. And she said, I had asked her, like, what's one of the big misnomers about the porn industry? Just something that people wouldn't think of. And she said, people forget that it's a production. She's like, the average video that you would watch for 20 minutes took probably about 4 to 8 hours to produce.
Yeah.
Like, there's a producer who's like watching, who's like, no, cut, like, do this differently. Okay, action, like, take 3 kind of thing. So yeah, it's so produced. And yeah, it's just it's crazy. So the expectations and all that is a huge part of it. And you would obviously know what that's like, having experienced like some body dysmorphia and all that kind of stuff, like the comparison and the thought trails and those kind of ruts you get stuck in, and just that like sense of it's never going to be enough, it's never going to be good enough, and all the fear that comes with it. It's awful. It's debilitating.
Yeah, for sure. That's actually an interesting point that you put out of it being like a production. That's like almost that's like watching a movie that's like 2 hours long and just thinking their whole experience that they experience in that 2 hour movie is 2 hours long.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Man, it's nuts. I think I don't remember when the first time was that I realized that it was like a production as opposed to real life, but I do remember hearing that and going, "Oh, that makes sense." Okay. Because before I
Yeah,
was like, man, they're lasting for half an hour straight
yeah,
with three women.
yeah. Seriously, like you just, and if you don't know any different, and I guess this is kind of the problem too. There's this law of first standard, which is that the first time you hear about a subject, if you know nothing about it, you will compare everything after to the first time you heard about it. So it's that same idea, right? Like if this is your first exposure to sex, and this is kind of like your idea, it's just creating these lofty standards that are, impossible to hit. Like not even those guys are hitting it. They're part of a production, with breaks in between, and they're probably popping some pills in between to keep it up. And there's all this stuff going on for them to achieve that. So um, yeah, so it's good. I'm actually glad we're talking about this. I don't always get to go here in podcasts, but I think it's important for guys and girls probably to just hear about some of the realities in comparison to what you're viewing on screen.
Yeah, of course. I feel like a blooper reel would almost benefit everyone watching it. Like at the end of each video, be like, look where I messed up.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea, but let's not share that with the industry because they don't need any more good ideas to get their viewers up.
It's true. That's true. Yeah, no, 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 no. Oh man, that's funny. So, like, why is porn addiction, like, why is that whole issue not being discussed as much now as it should be? I feel like this is a topic that should be covered a lot.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, given the prevalence and everything else we've discussed, like surely it would be reason enough to talk about it, offer resources, equip our mental health professionals to help their clients through it. The real guiding force in a lot of mental health diagnoses is the DSM. And the DSM-5, which I think came out in 2013, did not recognize pornography addiction. There was a very strong petition made for it, but ultimately the board, the committee, decided that there wasn't enough research to advocate for it, which is to me is absolutely ludicrous. Like, because like I said, I see it in my practice. Like guys are just struggling left, right, and center, and it's clearly affecting their marriages and everything else. And these guys are addicted. They have all the indicators of it. 2013 was a while back. Like in the 8 years or so since then, we have more research that's amounting. Research that shows that the brain of somebody who watches pornography regularly is really not that different than the person who does drugs regularly or the person who gambles regularly. There's a lot of overlap. There's kind of 5 criteria that qualify an addiction. We don't have to go through all of them, but they're finding that people actually do build tolerance to the porn that they watched, and it makes them watch worse stuff. We find that people do engage in riskier behaviors. Ted Bundy, who's like one of the most infamous serial killers. In one documentary, they asked him like, where did the flip ever switch for you, or like what got you on this trajectory? And he said, oh, it was pornography. Like he pointed back to it. So
Mm.
again, that was considered an anomaly back in the day, but we're seeing now that like it does force people to engage in riskier behaviors. They're seeing that people are neglecting their social lives. Like I said, they're pushing off their friends. Yeah, I can't make it tonight. I'm busy. It's impacting their regular daily functioning. And then we're also seeing that then the quantity of engagement is going up quite a bit as well as people become more involved. And there's a couple other diagnostic criteria, but a case is at least starting to be built for it. But honestly, the biggest problem, Harry, to answer your question a bit more directly, is just that people are scared to talk about it. Even the people struggling, like my story is not that uncommon. There's always these fears of what happens if I step out. Um, I'm very grateful for initiatives like Bell Let's Talk here in Canada, and movements around the world now that are really giving people who struggle with depression and anxiety a voice, and a place to find some healing and some hope and whatever. The struggle with porn is just we're way behind. There aren't those kinds of places, and because people aren't talking about it as openly and as safely, we're also not getting as much accurate data in the research. So all of that together is kind of keeping the attention away. And I do think there's probably a more sinister agenda on behalf of the porn companies as well. The porn is likely like a like a deca-billion-dollar industry. Again, we don't know the exact numbers because a lot of these companies are private, but they're making tons and tons of money off of it. So I would bet a pretty penny that those guys don't want this thing to be diagnosed. They don't want the research spotlight to go in this area, because if it does, it could spell a different outcome for their pockets that are getting lined pretty nicely right now by all their viewers.
Yeah, man. Oh my goodness, that is terrifying. Oh, I had shoot, I had a point and I forget what it was. But I guess like how are we going to like educate young adults and teenagers, and even like for more age appropriate matter, like elementary school kids, like how do we educate them further about like the risks of porn watching?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't think we have a complete answer to it yet. And that's partially because of the delinquency of the research and everything else. I think the most helpful thing is talking about it. And my personal, this kind of plays into my value system a little bit, but my personal feeling is that the best education you're going to get on sex ideally comes from the home. I realize that's not what's actually happening. It certainly didn't happen in my home growing up. But I think educating the kids, the other important part of that equation is educating the parents. Because a lot of parents are scared to talk to their kids about these things. And it's a lot more fear based. It's like, oh, I hope little Timmy doesn't watch that stuff. Let's put an internet blocker on it. Like, that's fine. That can be one part of your solution, but you got to talk to the kid. You got to let them know this stuff's out there. When you encounter it, here's some things to think about. I just think the earlier that you get ahead of it, obviously, again, it has to be age appropriate. You use the right term there, but those conversations need to happen, and I think it's better they happen in the home. So that's sort of my idealistic opinion about it. And then I think as well, like, we need to somehow get it into education systems as well. Again, it doesn't have to be this super like, if you watch porn, you're going to be miserable later on. Like, it should not be a fear mongering thing, but it's better to just acknowledge, hey, this stuff is out there. And when you guys encounter it, here's some things to think about. Here's a healthy way to respond. And I think we're still a little ways away from that just because the research is catching up. But to me, that's where I would really like to see things going.
That's actually like like hand in hand with like mental health discussion, because it's impossible to just go out there and be like, you will never experience depression if I teach you this. It's
Yeah.
way more helpful to be like, hey, when you experience these feelings, this is how you deal with them. It's a
Yes.
way better way to go approaching it.
Yeah, exactly. And I always say, like, I've heard some guys who are just like, oh man, the stupid porn industry. Like, I wish the porn, if it wasn't here, I'd never have this problem. Da da da. And I'm always like, oh yeah, you would. You so would.
Right.
Like, because if somebody's overweight, the problem isn't the grocery store. Like, we're not like, oh man, freaking grocery store, man, just killing me. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, you have an issue and you need to deal with it. And so I think what you said is exactly right. It's like, if we can teach people to kind of get in touch with this part of themselves and become aware of it, understand how to just manage it well, it just goes a long way in their decision making process, so that when they do get exposed to internet porn or other things that are destructive to them, they're actually equipped. They have an idea of how to manage it. To me, that's the ultimate solution.
Yeah, for sure. And man, I I want to give a shout out to my mom, because when I was 9 and like I was exposed to these things for the first time, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was like the best thing since sliced bread. And my young dumbass made an account on Pornhub, actually, using my mom's email on the family computer. thinking it was a great idea. And so, and so, she gets these emails and she like pulls me to the side. She's like, "What is this?" And like the conversation we had, like she put the internet blockers on, of course, but like we had an honest conversation about, why are you looking at this stuff? Like, it's not reality. And like, I really appreciate, like, even to this day, that moment, because, I was one of the few kids who like had that conversation with his parents about like,
Yeah.
an open, honest discussion about pornography and like how it's so far from reality. And
Yeah.
like I still experienced the body dysmorphia and the anxiety that came with having partners and all of that stuff. But I'm super thankful for that because, they handled it the right way. They nipped it right in the butt.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I always tell parents, like, because, you know, parents will come up to me when I go speak at events and stuff like that. Like, hey, I'm pretty sure my kid's struggling. What can I do? And my top tip to them, like, I'm not a parent myself, so I'm probably not the expert in this particular aspect of the issue. But my biggest encouragement is try to have conversations with them that feel safe to them, because kids can feel that, right? Like well, I mean, adults can feel that too. You can tell when somebody's like sort of panicked and like, okay, let's try to shut this thing down and just promise us you'll never do that again. That's a very different conversation than like, hey, how did you come into this? Like, what happened? What was going on? Like a little bit, again, like you're still asking and you're still like exposing the thing, but you're doing it in a way that they actually feel safe and comfortable, and that like you're not going to hate them for this problem that they have or this decision that they made. So that goes a long way. And dude, I mean, yeah, shout out to your mom. That's fantastic. That's the kind of response you want, ideally.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're a parent listening, follow my mom's strategy move or whatever.
Yeah.
So I guess my last question for you, man, like if there's people out there listening who are dealing with this, debilitating porn addiction, and they might not even have realized it until they watch this, they're like, oh shit, I do have a problem. Like, what are ways from your own experience or from research you've done, like what are ways that they can start their recovery? And then to add on to that question, what are ways to maintain it when temptation is literally everywhere?
Yeah, yeah. So these are great questions, and we could literally record a whole nother episode on them. But I'll give the Coles notes. I think the basic premise is that in life, the external is always a manifestation of the internal. And that has to guide the way that we solutionize something like pornography. So, somebody struggling with porn, the tendency is like to install an internet filter. So it's like, I'll put a filter on. They don't talk to anybody, nobody knows. They don't do anything else. It's just like, I'll put the filter on because that makes sense to us. It's like, yeah, I'm doing this thing. I'll put a barrier in front of it so that I no longer do the thing. Anybody who's done that, though, they know that in their worst moment, in their moment of desperation, you can always find a way around the filter.
Yeah.
Why? Because there's something internal that's driving that external behavior or decision. So if you're really looking to get out or to get free, you have to identify what are actually the underlying aspects that are underpinning this drive and these decisions to watch porn in the first place. And if you can resolve things there at a more root level, the behaviors start to take care of themselves. So that is the basic premise of achieving freedom. And the preventative aspects of achieving freedom are much more oriented around having healthy connections with people, doing like hobbies or things that are going to be really life-giving for you on a regular basis. The more satiated you are at a heart level, the less likely you are to drift and wander and kind of seek out this sort of behavior. Those are some of the best ways to kind of just get started. Now, I do have a resource for your audience here. It's called the Ultimate Recovery Guide, and it lays out my 5 best practices for somebody who wants to get started. That's what I would dive into, like if we did another episode on this. So they can get it at ultimaterecoveryguide.com. But that outlines some really good places just to get started. Just talking about focusing on internal life, the importance of talking to people and finding the right people to talk to, because there's such a thing as the wrong people to talk to about the issue as well. So you want to do that right. But some of those things can go a really long way, both to get free and also to stay free.
Amazing, man. I will put that resource down below. Where else can my viewers find you, like socials, podcasts? Where can my viewers find you if they want to get to know you better?
Yeah, so a couple of different ways. I'm on Instagram. It's Sathiya me Sam, and I do quite a bit of education on there, just talking about sort of the harmful effects of porn and ways to get started. My website is actually a great place if you want to find out about my podcast or join my mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter just the latest insights in research and kind of what I'm finding out in my own practice. And then I'm a host of the New Man podcast, and we're the only weekday podcast in the addiction recovery space. So we release 5 episodes a week. And again, just really passionate about educating people, informing them, and trying to give practical things that people can do to get free. Because just circling back, like when I was struggling, there wasn't this stuff out here. And if it was very fluffy and frilly, and like you weren't really getting the real story or like the actual practical nuggets of here's what you actually need to do if you kind of want to push the needle forward. So we just try to address that issue as best as we can through all our different channels.
I love it, man. I'll put those links down below. Sathiya, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, my pleasure. And dude, you have a really good thing going here. Thanks for all you're doing as well. I'm cheering you on.
Oh, mad respect for that, man. Thank you. And to all my listeners, I will see you guys next time.